I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear
I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
Hello everyone, it's the President's Guy, and gonna be doing another odd reaction today. And it's gonna be to Ben Shapiro's America's Worst Presidents. And apparently this is part of his Facts series, episode 9. I didn't even know this was a series he had. But, like with the presidential tier ranking, we can expect a lot of conservative bias in this. I really do try my best to be bias-free when giving my analysis of any president or reacting to things. So, I mean, we see Clinton on here. I don't know if Clinton's going to be on that list, but we can imagine it's going to be pretty much all Democrats, probably mostly modern ones. I think this video is a few years old. I think this is from 2022, to double check. But let's get into it and see what we think.
Who are the 5 worst presidents in American history? Now, you've heard a lot of historians sound off on this, and they'll give you names like Donald Trump, George W. Bush. That's because they're partisan hats. We're going to talk about the 5 real worst presidents in American history. 5th worst president, Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter?
Jimmy who?
I don't know who he is.
So Jimmy Carter actually kind of pales in comparison to the other 4 because he only...
Obviously, being from Georgia and with Jimmy Carter having passed recently, I'm biased towards Jimmy Carter. But he really, and one of the few good things about his passing is we're finally starting to reevaluate his presidency. People just want to talk about inflation and the Panama Canal, and he created the Department of Education. But you have to keep in mind that the Panama Canal in 1977 was going to be the next Vietnam if we wanted to keep it. And the American people did not want another war. So, you know, people want to say, oh, he just gave it away, but it's far more nuanced than that. The inflation was already rampant. You know, it happened under Nixon and Ford. Carter just, you know, took the brunt of it, and it was clearing itself up when Reagan came in. But to say that Jimmy Carter is one of the bottom 5 presidents of all time, no way.
Only had 1 term to ruin America. But everybody remembers stagflation, really, really high levels of inflation and stagnation, huge unemployment rates, 8, 9, 10%, inflation rates, 14%, massive gasoline shortages, gas lines, the Iranian Revolution, which he sort of backed. I mean, he let the Shah fall, leading to the Iran hostage crisis of 1979 to 1980. He entered the presidency, pledging to reverse our, quote, inordinate fear of communism, and the Soviet Union took him up on that, then invading Afghanistan. That's all the stuff he did while he was president, but he wasn't president for that long. He was president for 4 years and 4 years only.
You can't blame everything that happens in the world on the president, because he's also leaving out the nuclear armistice deal that Carter got through when he was president with the Soviet Union. So it's not so much to say that the president is responsible for every bad thing that happens in every other country in the world, because Russia invaded Afghanistan, during Reagan's term. Is that Reagan's fault?
Only. He was a horrible post-president. He built some houses.
Horrible post-president? He's like the greatest post-president ever. What are you talking about? He's just been doing charity work and building houses. What the hell?
For homeless people.
Look, it's Jimmy Carter.
That's great. He also hung out with Hamas and actively wrote speeches for Uber terrorist Yasser Arafat, claiming that Hamas's election was actually legitimate. He opposed U.S. intervention in the Gulf War in Kuwait. He actively wrote letters to...
Opposing a war is pretty standard with Jimmy Carter's character. I wouldn't say that makes him a bad president. We still did it.
Other members of the UN Security Council asking them to vote against the United States. That's wild.
Okay, well, I wonder what he would think now about us withdrawing from the UN Human Rights Council.
Helped broker the North Korean nuclear deal that eventually led to North Korea gaining nuclear weapons. So, yeah, terrible, terrible ex-president. Probably a worse ex-president than he was even as president, which is saying a lot because he was a real crap president.
That was a hot take. Of course, Obama's on the list.
Barack Obama clocks in on this list at number 4.
Thank God for Obama, because at least now, you know, they know Kenya.
No. Please don't bring up Obama.
To understand what a bad president Barack Obama is, you have to understand Trump is an outgrowth of Barack Obama. He's a reaction to Obama. And then Biden is a reaction to Trump. So if you're going to talk about where American politics truly went completely off the rails, the answer is Barack Obama. Barack Obama came into office as a unifier.
It happened during his term, but it certainly wasn't his fault.
I'm so excited because we are going to change the world.
And then he proceeded to radically divide the American population. You can see it in the polling data. 72% of white adults thought race relations were good in 2013. So did 66% of black people. By 2015, that number was 51% of blacks and 45% of whites.
Okay. Wow, that is cherry-picked. 2013, he's been in office for 5 years. So what happened in those 5 years? What happens from 2013 to 2015 is you see the rise of these police killings. You see the rise in the spread of it on social media, so it's available to everybody, and everyone can see it, and everyone's mad about it. And yeah, the Black Lives Matter movement begins to gain traction during this time. But people's perception of what's going on is important to a degree, but it doesn't change abject reality.
Barack Obama's racial polarization was dramatic. He presided over race riots in Ferguson and Baltimore.
You can't blame someone for presiding over something. There have been race riots. There were race riots under Trump in 2019, 2020. Are you going to blame him for those too?
He promoted the lie that police officers all over the United States are racist, contributing to the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, raising crime rates around the country.
These young men are incredibly angry. Everything happening.
He presided over the weakest economic recovery in modern American history.
I'm fairly certain that America outpaced the rest of the world in the 2009-2010 recovery. With that said, I wasn't a big fan of the Recovery Act. It was too much on the capital side to businesses instead of helping people directly. But are you going to blame Bush for tanking the economy?
History, because his decision was he was going to spend endless amounts of money and regulate the living hell out of the economy. The Congressional Budget Office initially said that Obamacare would cost $940 billion. It has now been estimated it will cost $1.7 trillion. Life expectancy in the United States in 2010, when Obamacare kicked in, was 78.54. Today, it is 77.28. So,
1 million people dying during COVID would probably drop your life expectancy. And the fact that it only went down a year during all that shows how much better we've been doing.
Nailed it with Obamacare. He polarized the country on social issues, including, most prominently, same-sex marriage, where he simply decided to reverse his position from 2008 on same-sex marriage and declare that every...
Well, you have to remember that Biden kind of forced that, because I think it was in 2012, Biden does an interview where he talks about him and the president being pro-gay, and then Obama comes out a week later with it, because he kind of had to. But that was also the direction that the country was going, and the way that Obama probably really felt all along. But in 2004 and 2008, if you were running for president, you couldn't run on being pro-gay. It was just the times, you know, and you kind of have to grandstand a little bit when you're running for office.
Everybody who actually held his position from 2008 was an evil, bigot, terrible person.
Marriage is between a man and a woman.
He utilized the IRS to target his political opponent.
No, he didn't. That has been disproven so many times. Obama did not do that.
He weaponized the DOJ under both Eric Holder and Loretta Lynch. He presided over the use of the FBI to target Donald Trump in the 2016 election. On the foreign policy front, he alienated traditional allies like Israel, sending pallets of cash to America's enemies like Iran. He basically ceded all of Crimea to Russia and then ceded leadership.
I will say that Democrats in the last 10 to 15 years have not been solid in their dealings with Iran. They haven't been. But not invading Russia over the Crimea thing, you know, again, we had just ended the Iraq war. The Afghan war was still going on. People didn't want another war. And you have to use the political capital you're given. It was easier to send aid to Ukraine in the wake of the Russian invasion in 2022 than this would have been at the time.
In Syria to Russia. He destabilized the Middle East by backing the Arab Spring, radically pulled American troops out of Iraq, and led to the rise of ISIS. And by the way, he spent more money than all...
No, the rise of ISIS comes from a speech given by Colin Powell in like 2001, basically giving people more credit than they really deserve for terrorist events, and basically inflating their importance over there. ISIS is an outcropping of the post 9/11 like war on terror, and us constantly in like being in the Middle East where they don't want us.
all prior 43 presidents combined.
That's also a trend, like basically of every president ever, is they accumulate as much debt as the previous president. That's kind of been a little different recently, but that wasn't anything unique to Obama. Bush did the same thing. So, again, it's just cherry picking numbers to put out, your narrative.
Well, let's see if my credit card still works.
So, yeah, terrible, terrible president. Third worst president of all time. Most people label him the first, but I actually don't think he matches up, is James Buchanan. Saying that James Buchanan is the worst president of all time is a little much, considering that it would have been on him to stop the Civil War from happening. James Buchanan, in the lead up to the Civil War, endorsed the view that whatever the Supreme Court said about slavery would be obeyed. He actually knew the outcome of Dred Scott, which essentially ruled that black people were not citizens of the United States and could not be citizens of the United States beforehand when he said that. He was a Pennsylvania Democrat, very, very sympathetic to Southern slavery positions. In his inaugural address, he called the issue of slavery, quote, happily a matter of but little practical importance. Wrong. He actually said that while secession was illegal, the government didn't have the power to stop it, which led a lot of states to be like, okay, well, then I guess we can leave. Again, could he have prevented the Civil War from happening right then?
Probably not.
Maybe. Although, obviously, the circumstances were building toward the Civil War pretty clearly. That's the only reason I don't have Buchanan as like number one on this list of crappy presidents. It's more of this
should be Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson is the worst president of all time. But yeah, I agree with all that. James Buchanan, terrible president. He was in that part of like Fillmore all the way up until Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, all just terribly weak executives kicking the can down the road on slavery. And again, like Ben said, he probably couldn't have stopped the Civil War, but he just didn't even try.
Preborn.com/Ben.
Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Surprised he doesn't have FDR.
Is marching on.
Second worst president of all time, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Utter disaster area. Literally the only good mark on LBJ's record is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Those,
which are a huge deal. A huge deal. And I would also say Medicare and Medicaid are pretty cool too.
The only good mark. The big boo-boos for LBJ, the Great Society. So the Great Society was an attempt to, quote, fight the war on poverty. This amounted to spending trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars, making government encroach into nearly every area of American life, offering subsidies, threatening prosecutions and fines. Government offered, instead of prosperity, the prospect of intergenerational poverty through sponsorship of single motherhood, through welfare programs that disincentivized marriage. The black single motherhood rate in 1960 was under 20%, and the black single motherhood rate today is above 70%.
And to blame that on the Great Society is a big stretch. There's correlation and there's causation. I'm not saying that there's not any relation between that, but I don't think you can put the single motherhood rate simply at the fact that they think the government will send them a check. Do things like that happen? Yes. Is it just to the black community? Absolutely not. So again, this is just a stretch with cherry-picked numbers to illustrate your point.
The black middle class actually expanded way faster before the Great Society programs than they did after. According to the Cato Institute,
and that's also proportionate to the middle class as a whole.
Institute's Michael Tanner, between 1963 and 2010, the federal government spent $13 trillion fighting poverty. The poverty rate, by the way, in 2012 was 15%, slightly higher than it was in 1966. So he spent $13 trillion to increase the poverty rate. He got America deeply involved in the war in Vietnam, most disastrous war in American history. Even if you believe that we should have been involved in the war in Vietnam, if you're going to go in, you go in with overwhelming force, and you break things, and you win the war. That is not what LBJ did.
That's so easy to sit there and play armchair general. The American people were over Vietnam, and the only way we were going to win was instigating another world war, and it just wasn't worth it.
He presided over serious racial unrest. Christopher Caldwell writes in his book, The Age of Entitlement, the changes of the 1960s with civil rights at the
almost half the presidents from since the 1940s have presided over a race riot of some description, including Eisenhower, Nixon, Carter, Reagan, Clinton, Bush, Obama. So again, you're saying this happened while they were president, so it must be their fault.
The Corps were not just a major new element in the Constitution. They were a rival constitution with which the old one was frequently incompatible. The federal government was given extraordinary power to end discrimination, both real and imagined, both in the private sector and in the public sector. As Caldwell writes, when instances of racism couldn't provide the proper pretext for government interventionism, the rubric of anti-discrimination was expanded to include any supposedly victimized minority group. So this paves the way for the LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign movement. The civil rights models of executive order, litigation, court-ordered redress eventually became the basis for government to do what the Constitution would previously not have permitted.
I would love to see an updated list now where he did this with all of Trump's encroachments of executive power that are blatantly unconstitutional.
1913 Woodrow Wilson takes us into World War I.
The worst president in American history, bar none, Woodrow Wilson. First of all, he was an authoritarian.
If you're being objective, he's probably not in the bottom 5. From a personality and a character standpoint, he absolutely is, because God, was he a dog shit person.
He actually wrote, quote, "The president is at liberty, both in law and conscience, to be as big a man as he can. His capacity will set the limit." He actually believed that the presidency of the United States was really the only branch that ought to matter.
And people like Roosevelt said the same thing. A lot of presidents have viewed the executive as the end-all be-all, so I wouldn't say that's exclusive to Wilson. That doesn't justify it, and that's going to depend on your personal view of how big you think the presidency should or shouldn't be. But Wilson definitely was big into executive power.
The idea is that experts in the executive would be able to do things and react more quickly than the antiquated checks and balances of the Constitution. On the moral level, Wilson was just craptastic. He was a fan of eugenics. He actually pushed for compulsory sterilization of people with Down syndrome in 1907. That's before he was president. He even signed a compulsory sterilization bill while he was governor of New Jersey in 1911. Famously, he promised to keep America out of the war in his re-elect effort in 1916, then got America involved in World War I by...
Like, almost immediately. Like, 2 months into his second term, we get involved in the war.
Helping to blockade Germany, and then when Germany attacked American shipping, got America directly involved in World War I. His...
sort of, yeah, I mean, but you could look, people want to point to like the Lusitania attack and say that was why we got in the war, but that was like 2 years beforehand. Wilson just wanted to get in the war because he wanted to be the hero.
Attempts to broker a peace at the Versailles Conference ended in utter disaster and probably paved the way for World War II.
The Versailles Conference does lead to World War II from the way we punished Germany, but Wilson actually went in there with some good ideas. The problem is he wasn't the person to implement them because he really thought he was like Jesus. He had a real big Messiah complex. He had a huge ego. And if you disagreed with him, he pretty much thought you were like an imbecile.
He curbed civil liberties via his Attorney General, A. Mitchell Palmer, and he helped press forward the Sedition Act of 1918 that actually made it a crime for American citizens to, quote, print, utter, or publish any false, scandalous, and malicious writing about the government.
Which is basically an extension of the Alien Sedition Acts from John Adams, which, again, Trump is using now. So, again, if we were to make an updated version of this video, I wonder what Shapiro would have to say about that.
Wildly unconstitutional. He nationalized major American industries, including the telegraph industry, the telephone industry, railroad industry. He created a massive economic recession that actually developed into an outright economic crisis in 1920. On the racial front, disaster area. He resegregated the federal services. He presided over major race riots. He showed Birth of a Nation at the White House and called it writing history with lightning.
He did.
And by the last couple of years of his administration, he was not even in charge of his own administration.
Oof.
His brain was actually non-functional, and it was Edith Wilson who was actually governing the country at that point.
True.
So a terrible president.
He had a stroke in the middle of his second term, and he would just basically be in like the residence, and someone would bring up like something for him to sign. She would take it in and come out, and then the president had signed it. So we basically had the first woman president.
Economically terrible president, terrible wartime president, terrible president on race, terrible president in terms of structuring a massive federal bureaucracy. Just a horrific president, Woodrow.
There's a great quote, the right hate him for being progressive and the left hate him for being racist, so there's no one left for anyone to like Wilson.
If somebody says, George W. Bush was the worst president ever, really? Did George W. Bush show Birth of a Nation at the White House and stand for eugenics and get us into World War I leading to World War II?
No, he didn't, and Bush is genuinely a good human being, but he did get us involved in 2 useless wars. He passed a ton of terrible legislation, particularly in his second term, like the Postal Service Reform Accountability Act, No Child Left Behind. You know, just doing what Republicans typically do, which is destroy the government so they can say it doesn't work. I think Bush probably actually did those things with the best intentions because, again, I think he's a good person. But no, he's definitely in the bottom 10 presidents. Nice guy, though.
And also declare himself kind of a dictator. Did he do those things? No. His
Trump did.
Two big failings, the Iraq War and the economic crisis of 2007-2008, that crisis was not of his making. That came from the Clinton administration. It was their attempt to push subprime mortgages down on the banks and allow bad borrowers to take...
If that's the case, you can blame the housing crash on them, but you can't blame the entire economic recession on them.
The money. As far as the Iraq War had wide bipartisan support.
It did.
And then there's Trump. When people say that Trump was the worst president ever, what they're really referring to is his rhetoric.
And January 6th. And everything he's doing now.
Bad tweets, whatever kind of weird stuff he was saying that day. But in terms of policy, not even close. Trump presided over a massively booming economy. He put conservatives on the Supreme Court.
Yeah, and it was Obama's economy. And what's funny about the Supreme Court thing is now that Barrett's on there, Steve Bannon's going after her because she made a grimacing face at the State of the Union. So they'll turn on you just like that. There's no principle behind the Trump movement. It's just, you can do whatever you want so long as it benefits me. Like, people are upset about some of the government cuts because it's personally affecting them. He's like, well, I wanted you to cut the government, just not the stuff that I want.
Court to actually reestablish the checks and balances set up by the Constitution. He helped actually broker peace in the Middle East, which used to be a Nobel Prize thing, and now everybody just ignores because Trump did it. He kept Russia and China largely in check. He's the first president in my lifetime who didn't get America involved directly in a foreign war. The notion that Trump is even remotely near the top of the list of worst presidents ignores a lot of very, very bad presidents.
Oh, well, that was something. If I were going to quickly throw out my bottom 5 presidents, it's Andrew Johnson, James Buchanan, Franklin Pierce, Millard Fillmore, and Andrew Jackson, just off the top of my head. Trump is working his way down there, though, the more and more stupid things he does. But let me know what you thought about that. You know, Shapiro is obviously pretty biased when it comes to modern politics, but the stuff with Wilson and Buchanan were pretty on the money. He's pretty good on these things when it's, you know, like in the 19th century. He can be pretty fair and unbiased in these things. But let me know what you thought. Who are your least favorite presidents and who are your favorite presidents? Let me know down below. And until next time, remember, never stop learning.